Why do Canadians always do well in the Winter Olympics? Because they always bring their A game. I was in the Olympic Village and I saw a guy walking by with a pole slung across his shoulder. And I said to him, "Are you a pole vaulter?" And he said, "No, I'm a German. And don't call me Walter." That one's great. That one's great. I was recently arrested for trying to steal a bunch of Olympic medals. And I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids. That one was kind of dumb. I'm kind of ashamed I told that one actually. I wish I could just go back and edit this out, but it's not worth the time, frankly. All right. Obviously. Oh, okay. One more. Uh, I took part in the suntan Olympics. I got the bronze. Okay, enough. So dumb. Oh, it's really, really bad. Okay. So, yes, we are going to be talking about the Olympics today. Um, as many of you know, the Olympics that we have here in our modern world today, well, they're canceled this summer because of Corona, but um, the Olympics that would have been this summer are a tradition that originates with the ancient Greeks. Now, the Olympics we have today, of course, is very different than the Olympics of the ancient Greeks. Um, but the concept is pretty similar. I mean, we have different sports, of course, um, and we have countries from all over the world competing, and the way the Olympics works is different. But the original idea of the Olympics did originate in ancient Greece. The purpose of the Olympic Games was to honor the gods, specifically to honor Zeus. Um, so, in the ancient Olympic Games in ancient Greece, the best athletes from all of the city states of Greece would come to, they were usually in Athens. They would travel to Athens and they would compete against each other in different athletic events. Things like um, um, throwing a discus or running a marathon or wrestling, um, throwing a javelin. Things like this were um, all activities that athletes would perform in the ancient Greek Olympic Games. Um, and the idea was the athletes were supposed to honor a god or goddess by dedicating their athletic efforts and if they won their athletic achievement to that god or goddess. Right? So um, the Olympic Games, like I said, were held in honor of Zeus. And what the Greeks would do is, wherever the Olympic Games are being held, they would create a large statue of Zeus at the Temple of Zeus at the Olympic site. Right? So they'd make it really clear these Olympics are about Zeus. And then if you won your competition, you were given a prize, right? You were given a wreath of leaves to show other people that you won. And oftentimes you were given really valuable gifts. Like, for example, you'd be given free meals for life in that city state. Right. So if you were the winner of the Olympics when it came to like throwing a javelin, if you could throw that farther than anyone else, your prize would be a wreath, and then you'd get free meals for life. It's kind of cool. Um, Olympic Games were also opportunities for city states who are warring with one another to have a truce. So during the Olympic Games, if two city states were at war, violence between the two city states would stop, and then it would resume again after the Olympic Games. Right, so all the Greeks understood the significance and importance of the Olympic Games. Greeks also held a lot of other festivals to honor their gods. So at different festivals, competition would be a part of that as well. So you would have festivals where poets would compete to write the best poetry, playwrights would compete to write the best plays, musicians would compete to produce the best music, etc., etc. Right. Um, so yeah, very exciting aspect of ancient Greece. Okay, remember, we're talking about all of this because these are parts of ancient Greek religious belief. Without belief in the ancient Greek gods and goddesses, these festivals, these games probably would have looked very different or might not have occurred at all. Right? So, Greek religion was a really big part of culture and everyday life in ancient Greece. Remember, the Greeks believed that their gods and goddesses actually physically lived in Greece, that their home was on Mount Olympus, but that they could come down from Mount Olympus and walk through the streets of the different city states, right? They believed a lot of demigods and demigoddesses, for example, like the Muses and different nymphs and other semi godlike creatures lived in natural places like the forests and in the ocean and in a creek or a stream, right? So they thought places like ponds, forests, and mountains were sacred because these were places of these deities. Right? So, in addition to believing that certain places were sacred in ancient Greece, uh, the Greeks also built a lot of temples to the different gods and goddesses and deities. Probably the most famous one, or at least one of the most famous ones, is this place. It's called, this is the ruins of it, this is what's left of it, but it was called the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, or Delphi, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Now, the reason the Temple of Apollo is so famous is because the Greeks believed that an oracle lived there. An oracle is a person who people believe can predict the future, right? So, kind of like a fortune teller, but like on steroids, right? So, people would travel from all around the Mediterranean world to visit this oracle at Delphi, and they would ask her questions about the future, and she would respond by giving like really weird answers that you would have to think about for a really long time and kind of interpret. Right? So the oracle at Delphi features in a lot of ancient Greek stories and plays. So in the poems of the plays of Aeschylus, for example, we see interactions between the oracle of Delphi and a lot of the main characters. Remember in the previous video, I talked about how Greek religious belief had a big impact on their ideas about fate and whether or not human beings have free will. Well, the presence of the oracle at Delphi is a testament to that, right? Because the oracle of Delphi pronounces people's fates. She makes predictions about the future. And these predictions are unavoidable. People try to escape their fate if the fate is bad. They try to hasten it if it's good. But their activities in resisting or hastening the fate that the oracle predicts for them usually just either brings it about or makes it worse, right? So, Greeks had a very strong belief that once your fate was established, it was sealed, and there was really nothing you could do about it. Okay, let's move on to section 2. So, section 2 is about art and other cultural achievements. So, one thing you need to know about the ancient Greeks is more than any other culture throughout history, or at least as well as any other culture throughout history, the Greeks were probably the best at certain art forms, right? So they're probably the best in terms of writing plays, right? The English were also very good at writing plays, but I would say the ancient Greeks as a whole were probably best. Shakespeare's probably the best playwright in history, and he's English. And England has a lot of other really good playwrights too. But I think if you compare like the average English play to the average ancient Greek play, the average ancient Greek play is probably a little bit better. So yeah, the ancient Greeks were probably best at producing plays. They're one of the best at producing poetry. They're probably definitely the best at producing certain art forms like sculpture and pottery. Um, so yeah, they prided themselves, and yeah, they prided themselves on their skill. And I think part of the reason they were so good at producing art forms like this is because they had a deep sensitivity to and appreciation for beauty. Right? They had theories on what made things beautiful. They thought about it, um, and they tried very hard to make their art conform to those ideals of beauty. And they've lasted the test of time. Um, so, like I said, the ancient Greeks were especially renowned for creating pottery, like this vase here. Also, sculpture, architecture, poems, and plays. Um, so, the the Greeks would use art and literature as a way of expressing their ideas and communicating things down through generations. Quick note about pottery. Pottery was an art form that is both an opportunity for the artist to produce something to demonstrate his skill. Right? So pottery, you could show your skill as a potter, and then you could also show your skill as a painter by painting scenes onto the pottery. Um, but in addition to that, it was an opportunity for these artists to actually produce things that were useful to everyday people, and they could sell them to everyday people for a good price. Right? So being a potter was actually a very good profession because you got to demonstrate your skill, and you got to actually make money by doing this because people would want to buy it because the stuff you produce, your art, is useful to them. So Greek pottery was really well crafted. They would create vases like this, cups, jars, bowls. So yeah, again, they're useful for everyday life, but they could also be used for decoration as well. Um, okay, let's do one more. So Greek sculpture, that's what we'll move on to next. So the Greeks were really known for producing the best sculptures out of really all ancient civilizations. They're especially well renowned in the Mediterranean world because that's where their sculptures would actually be seen. Um, One reason the Greeks were so good at sculptures is because they believed that an athletic, muscular human body was the most beautiful thing in the entire world. Scarlett thinks that too. Um, oh, I'm embarrassed I said that. I couldn't resist. Sorry, sixth grade. Ah, that's really funny. Okay. Uh, okay. So the Greeks would create really like life-size sculptures, sometimes larger than life-size sculptures of gods and goddesses for their different temples. They would also carve things into stone walls. Um, and like I said, they mainly carved human figures because they thought this was the most beautiful thing in the world. A human body that was like muscular and athletic was the most beautiful thing in the world for the ancient Greeks. Their works were carved for public display, and the more beautiful it was, the more skilled the sculptor was. And then they would dedicate their sculptures to the gods and the goddesses.